In 2012, Martin from Curtin University's Business School published this paper that looks at the impact of educational technology, specifically e-books and e-textbooks, and how they may evolve over time. I'd like to use that as an anchor point for today's sessions to see just how close she was in her predictions. And I'd also like to track the research after her paper to see what sort of input we got and what sort of observations about the use of e-books. So in 2014, our colleagues in Northern Ireland predicted that staff were receptive to e-books at that stage. However, 40% of academics had not used e-books. So this was an interesting period. You know, the technology had evolved where there was a much easier array of tools to develop e-books. And in fact, locally, that was happening. So here at Bond, Sterling and Burt were working on an anatomy e-book, and their findings are quite interesting. They found that the students really had a very positive experience, and indeed they correlated an improvement in their grades based on this book. But they did point out that the e-book, when compared to traditional anatomy pracs, there was no difference in student performance. And I'm thinking this is common sense. In fact, many of us have done much of our training in education around what's called the learning pyramid, where we are told that passive learning is not as effective as active learning. So essentially, doing is much better than the passive act. In fact, lectures are ranked down there at 5% efficacy. Now, this is interesting. This research came from the NTL Institute, which actually grew from the 1940s, work from Kurt Lewin in 1947, who was a social psychologist. NTL tell us they don't have the original research to support these exact figures, but many still accept that the pyramid of learning, the learning pyramid, still has some relevance in today. Doing and teaching is the most effective method. Thus, pracs are highly efficient. Research went on, 2015 in computer science at Georgia Tech. They found that students deeply engaged with interactive activities in e-books. They also found that, that when the educational psychology was applied to the development of e-books, that learners improved their performance. I think these are interesting findings. In a very small study the year after, in fact N=7, qualitative interviews and research found that students still had some resistance to the use of e-books because of the cost. And I'll give you a case study soon on an example of how that impacted decisions that were made at a university. So look, in summary, the e-books have evolved, the way they have developed have evolved. If we have a look at the origins of the e-book, they really hail from PDFs. Now, PDFs I don't think of as e-books because there's very limited interactivity. Yes, you can have a whole book as a PDF, you can search it, you can have some interactivity. You can theoretically embed hyperlinks and some video and so on. But what we've seen is other solutions develop. So cloud-based, i.e. internet-based solutions of e-books. There's a standard that I'll explain in another episode, EPUB, and then we're seeing some proprietary solutions from some of the vendors out there as well. So let's start to look at what the publishers are doing. They're talking about learning environments. Now, a number of players out there have done work in ebooks. VitalSource are a group that for some years now have been used to outsource material for them to develop. In fact, they have a team in the Indian subcontinent doing much of their work to develop ebooks for the publishers. Now, at the starting point, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, these lacked interactivity. It wasn't possible to take notes. They would work on tablet devices, but they were very limited. But now the publishers, the major players anyway, have their own platforms that not only have e-books, but they're learning spaces that are starting to develop work in adaptive learning. So really interesting space, having a look at what these folks are offering. Interesting stuff. But where I think it gets really interesting is self-publishing. And that's what I'd like to focus on in the next episode. So welcome back. We've covered the evolution of the ebook and some of the trends that have occurred, some of the basic research around the use of ebooks. I'd like to now focus on the area of self-publishing, because this, I think, is a real game changer. That now we have tools to allow one to develop their own ebooks and to do that simply and to deliver them in multiple formats. So firstly, cloud-based solutions. There are a number out there. One that I've certainly played with is this solution, Webbased, that allows you to import text, link to videos, have audio, really enriched environment, but the book is delivered via the internet. So of course that assumes one has a connection at all time. We're not quite there yet. I see this as a somewhat limited solution. It's an interesting one though. There's the video that I've embedded. It's possible to preview how it would look on different devices. So on a mobile phone, that ebook would look something like this. So yes, it's an ebook, but it's cloud delivered. Another group got together at about 8 years ago. In fact, Matt McInnes, a Canadian based in the Bay Area of San Francisco, kicked off a company called Inkling. And they made great headway to start with by working with publishers to create highly interactive textbooks. But they've upped the ante. What they have now is a solution called Inkling Habitat that allows for collaborative publishing of ebooks. Let's leave that to you to chase up and see what you think of some of their work. I'm quite impressed with the collaborative aspects of that. Also, first off the rank were books that were essentially apps. Apps for Android, apps for iOS, iPhone and iPad. So a number of folks really have followed that solution. Certainly there are outsourcing companies like Oomph that create magazines. They also work on academic journals, and we've seen academic journals be standalone apps as well. This edition of Hepatology, for example. When these are created, they can be distributed within their own store, or as just standalone apps, or they can use ebook distributors. Now, ebooks can be distributed in multiple ways, and there are a number of institutions and groups out there that are distributing ebooks. We've certainly got Amazon. They've been a player for quite some time. But we've also got folks like the iBook Store that Apple present that create, not only publish and distribute books that are commercially available, but free books. You can commercialize books that you make on either of these platforms or distribute them for free. I'd like to actually now show you some of these solutions from Amazon, Webbased, and I'd like to look at some of the magazines that are out. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these. I'll just use the clever EduTouch board to take us to a web page. So this is Webbased, which is a website that I mentioned on the slide, where one can actually import all of the text and so on. So here's the book I've worked on. This is how you would see it once I publish it. It has the various chapters. It allows you to embed all sorts of information, so graphics and so on. There's basically the cover of the book, the text that I've imported from Microsoft Word, all straight up to the web and then delivered by the web, and there's embedded video. So it's possible to embed all of this sort of material. We don't need to actually see that. That sort of material. Thank you. And look at different ways it's presented. So here's how it should look on a phone. So I'll just wait for it to redraw itself, and here of course is the issue with web-based solutions. You know, we've got to wait for that network. That's how it should look on the phone. So that's Webbased. Web-based solution, there are a number of them where one can put together ebooks, because the students, I think the evidence shows us, are certainly very mobily oriented at the moment. Let's now go to the mobile device to have a look at how it would work. So for this, I'll just change over and we'll use the magic of wireless networking to present this. Now, I spoke about the fact that there were magazines available and that apps were developed to start with some years ago. And this is still a very functional way to develop and deliver publications such as scholarly journals. Now, for example, if I have a look at one scholarly journal, so Hepatology from the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease, will notice that I can subscribe to the journal, I can jump into the journal, I can go through the journal articles, I can search for different articles and see what's the latest and greatest. I can jump back and have a look at a number of the issues. So very powerful for that very niche market of scholarly journals. But self-published journals and journals that have been outsourced, I mentioned oomph before. Well, a number of organisations have used oomph to deliver their magazines. The eScience app that we have here, for example, which actually just finished publication after some years, a month or two ago, is from the Faculty of Science at the University of Adelaide. And they outsource the material to oomph, who put this together for them, and they get a very interactive journal that they can use, that can link to websites, that can have interactivity, that can have stories that might be interesting, really engaging material that's been outsourced. So we've seen that in action. And then again, we have platforms to deliver material like Amazon. So let's have a look at an Amazon book. So if I go into my book folder, the Kindle app that's available for multiple platforms, be it Android or iPad or whatever, there's a huge number of books. This is just my library. Now, a number of scholarly texts are available on multiple platforms. The Manual for Medicine, or Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, for example, is a textbook that costs hundreds in print and is also a rather large text. I can fit dozens of such textbooks on this one device. It was $40 on Amazon as opposed to well above that in print. So it gives you an idea of some of the books that are available on Amazon. Some of these books are out of copyright and therefore free. Some of these books are freely available by the publishers, or they might be $1. There's a lot out there with Amazon.